Consider a legal problem. A postman's delivery bicycle suddenly snaps in half under stress. The bike had passed every prior rigorous safety inspection. Under a standard claim of common law negligence, the employer wins. They took all reasonable precautions, and the defect was entirely unforeseeable. Since there is no fault, there is no liability. But the tort of breach of statutory duty follows a different set of rules. In this context, the employer loses and must pay full compensation. To understand his outcome, we have to look at the 6 specific requirements used to construct a strict liability claim from scratch. Mastering this tort requires understanding how courts translate silent regulatory codes into active grounds for civil compensation. We begin at Node 1, Actionability. Simply breaking a rule is not enough. The statute in question must specifically permit a civil claim. The first step is statutory interpretation. We search the text for express wording from Parliament that either grants or denies civil liability. The Guard Dogs Act 1975 is a clear example of an express denial. Section 5 states that the Act shall not be construed as conferring a right of action in any civil proceedings. This text blocks a claim regardless of the injury sustained. But how do the courts proceed when a statute is completely silent on the matter? When Parliament provides no express instruction, the court applies a multi-factor judicial test to deduce what their intention likely was. The general rule comes from Lonrel Ltd v. Shell Petroleum. If a statute provides its own criminal penalty, such as a fine, the court presumes that civil claims are excluded. To see how this presumption is challenged, we can look back at the development of industrial safety laws. In Groves v. Lord Wimborne, an injured worker relied on the Factory and Workshop Act 1878. At the time, a breach of that act carried a maximum criminal fine of only £100. The court had to decide if a £100 fine was intended to be the only remedy available for a life-altering injury. The court found that because the fine was small and its payout was at the discretion of the Secretary of State, it was never intended to be an adequate or exclusive form of compensation. This establishes the rule for your analysis. The presumption that a criminal penalty excludes civil liability is rebuttable if that penalty fails to provide an effective remedy for the victim. Once a statute is found to be actionable, we move to Node 2, Duty. Unlike the broad neighbor principle in negligence, a statutory duty is confined to specific boundaries. To be owed a duty, the claimant must belong to the protected class defined by the statute. In that case, the claim failed because the deceased was a visitor, not an employee. Because he was not a factory worker, he fell outside the protection of the relevant regulations. If the claimant does not match the statute's protected class exactly, the claim ends immediately, regardless of the defendant's behavior. Before analyzing the breach, we must address a specific change in the law that frequently leads to errors in modern exam papers. Section 69 of the Enterprise and Regulatory Reform Act 2013 modified rules for workplace injury claims. It removed the right to bring a civil claim for breaches of health and safety regulations made under the 1974 Health and Safety at Work Act. You cannot advise a client to use these specific regulations for a civil claim today. This raises a question. If these regulations no longer allow for civil claims, why are they still prominent in legal education? While the direct right of action is gone, the cases interpreting those regulations established the foundational definitions of duty and breach that we still apply to other statutory claims. We apply those definitions at Node 3, Breach. Here, the specific wording of the statute determines the standard of liability. In Smith v. Northamptonshire County Council, a claim failed because a collapsed ramp did not meet the technical statutory definition of work equipment. In Stark v. Post Office, the claimant relied on a regulation requiring the employer to ensure equipment is maintained in an efficient state. Though the microscopic defect was undiscoverable, the court ruled the requirement created an absolute obligation, with no room for excuses regarding fault. This explains the paradox. Because statutory wording can impose absolute liability, a defendant taking every possible precaution can still be held fully liable for the resulting damage. We now move to Node number 4, Damage. Proving a breach is only useful if the damage suffered is the specific type of harm the statute was designed to prevent. This is illustrated by Goris v. Scott. A claimant sued after his sheep washed overboard, relying on a statute requiring animals to be penned. The claim failed. The court found the statute's purpose was to prevent infectious disease, not to prevent loss at sea. The damage was the wrong kind. Consider a modern commercial example: a local trader losing profits because a highway authority failed to repair a public road. The Highways Act is intended to protect users from physical injury. Since it does not cover purely economic business losses, the trader has no claim. Aligning the claimant's injury with the legislative intent functions as the statutory equivalent of the remoteness test in standard tort. Finally, we clear nodes 5 and 6, causation and defenses. You must still prove a but-for causal link between the breach and the injury. Additionally, defendants can still use the defense of contributory negligence to reduce the damages. This comparison shows why the statutory route is a practical choice in problem questions. In many scenarios, negligence and statutory duty can be argued concurrently using the same facts. When advising a client, prioritize the statutory claim whenever evidence of fault is weak, as it allows you to trigger liability regardless of the defendant's care. Use this 6-node checklist as your definitive blueprint for these claims. Mastering this framework ensures you can identify exactly when a silent regulation creates a valid claim based on strict liability.